The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
You could just see cuts happening.
What did that, Lieutenant?
I don't know.
What's the coroner got to say? He's in the jar and puking since he saw it.
They're gonna kill me for sure.
Did you do it?
There was somebody else there.
He was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Do you believe in the boogeyman?
No.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
No!
She's the only one who can stop it. If she fails,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
no one will survive. From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, my background before film was more literary, I suppose. The first real impulse I had to be artistic, I think strongly, was to write, which started about in junior high school. I started writing poetry and then sort of a satirical column in the high school newspaper, and that continued on into college with writing and being involved with the literary magazine. And then I went to Johns Hopkins for a master's degree in writing and got a master's in writing philosophy. So my first idea of myself was I was going to be some kind of a writer, probably a novelist or something like that. And I got a job teaching because I discovered that was a way to make decent money and still have a fair amount of time to yourself, and especially summers. And I was teaching when I became aware of movies for the first time. I was raised in this rather unusual background of fundamentalist Baptist church that did not condone going to movies, and my college also was like that. I came out of a Christian background, so I really didn't have a background in film or exposure to them much until I was teaching college, and then I was suddenly engulfed in all the great filmmakers of the 60s, Fellini and Buñuel and all of those people that were being shown on the college circuits. I was suddenly exposed to. I was just completely blown away. So I bought a 16-millimeter camera and did the usual thing of starting to make experimental films. And some students saw that I had a camera and immediately decided they wanted to make a film club. So we made a series of films all in 1 year. And at the end of the year, after having made a film literally by cutting it with scissors and splicing it together with Scotch tape and not even be able to find a book in the school library of how to make or edit a film, I decided that I loved the idea of making movies, that I knew nothing about it, and it was very frustrating. And I didn't want to go on and get my PhD, which is what my department chairman was insisting that I start seriously doing. So made the decision to go to New York during I quit my job. So I went to New York and during the summer vacation while I was still being paid. And at this time I was married and I had 2 children. And it was considered at best kind of wacky behavior. What do you mean you quit your job? And I looked for the whole summer and thought it would be easy being a college professor and having a master's degree and getting into something like the film business. It turned out to be having a degree meant nothing. And I went all around New York and didn't get a job. So at the end of the year, I went back sort of with my tail between my leg and took a job at a local high school. And I taught that year of high school and just was completely obsessed with the idea that I would love to make movies and continue to make little short films with my little Revere 16-millimeter silent camera. And at the end of the year, I went back. I quit my job again and went back for a second year. And there was a student that I had had when I was teaching college, Steve Chapin, who was a younger brother of Harry Chapin, who later was to become Harry Chapin of Taxi, the song, and everything else, but at that time was in New York working in a documentary film building. And through Steve, I met Harry, and Harry was editing industrials for IBM, of all things. And he said, look, I can't give you a job, but I'll teach you how to make films. You can sit next to me at the Steenbeck here, and I'll show you what I'm doing. So he did. And while we were doing that, the post-production house that he was working in fired their messenger. And the head of the place came to Harry and said, if you have a nephew or something that wants a job, we pay $75 a week. And I said, I'll take it. So that was my first job in film. From there, about 10 months later, I was assistant manager post-production. So I learned, all the sort of lab quality control and the whole editing room thing of filmmaking. And got more towards management, and I was very unhappy. And I one day did something quite stupid. I think I cut together a print that had come from the lab for a big screening, and spliced it together ACB instead of ABC, and got fired. And suddenly I found myself driving a cab in New York, and drove a cab for 6 months without being able to find another job. And thought, again, I've gone completely insane. I've got my family down here in New York. We were not able to pay any of our bills for a year. We had lost both our cars. We had every bank in the world that we had been associated with threatening us. And then I got, just on a fluke, a job on a small offbeat feature that was being done by a young 30-year-old producer, Sean Cunningham. I got a job syncing up dailies on a reshoot. And again, that led very quickly, within 10 months, to a very close friendship with Sean. I had learned even more of the basics of editing, this time from a very smart filmmaker named Roger Murphy, who was working with Sean making that film. And at the end of that, Sean had an offer from the guys that he had made that original film for. The outfit was called Cinema 77, and they were a group of Boston theater owners. And they had the odd habit of commissioning their own films, very low budget, and they had done a film called Don't Look in the Basement, which was a scary film, and they wanted a companion film to it. So they said to Sean, we want a scary film if you want to make it for us. So he came to me and said, I know you say you want to be a director. Here's a chance. I think we had a $50,000 budget. If you want, you can write it, you can direct it, you can cut it on my Steenbeck, and we'll make it. We'll be partners. Because we had become buddies. We had kids the same age, and we had roughly the same background. So I said fine, and I went off, and I had seen Virgin Spring recently, and I took that as the format and wrote in a long weekend this thing I called Last House on the Left. And we went out and made it, with 16 millimeter documentary type equipment. I think the whole crew was about 8 people. And when it was done, it was picked up. To our astonishment, first of all, it caused a huge sensation in the Boston area. There were riots. There was supposedly a heart attack. There were people trying to get into the projection booth to destroy the print. There were huge controversy. And it was picked up by AIP, American International Pictures, Sam Markoff's old thing, and became national. And suddenly, from making a film that we thought nobody would see, it was being seen nationally, and we were kind of famous and infamous at once. I think after I had made Last House, I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and remember sitting in the theater thinking this must have been made by like some sort of troupe of mad, insane people, which was, I think, a great realization, because I later realized people thought that about me. And subsequent to that, I've always said, if you're designing a scary movie, the first thing that you have to frighten your audience with is yourself. They have to be first, before they're frightened of the villain, they have to be frightened of the filmmaker. Because the filmmaker has to be a person that they cannot predict what he or she is going to do next, and that he or she is going to cross all the forbidden barriers. So, about that time, I was starting to get excited about making horror films, because the elasticity of the format is fantastic. I mean, I suddenly realized you can go into dreams, you can, and once you're into that, you can use any visual idea you want or can imagine. And the other thing that occurred to me is that you're kind of like, you're down there in the foundations of cinema itself, because cinema is very dreamlike. You know, it's experienced in a dark room. It is a chimera. It's shadows on a wall. And it's very, very evocative of the dream state itself. So in a sense, movies about dreams are very much part and parcel of the nature of the art form. Nightmare on Elm Street came out of a series of articles in the LA Times, if I'm not mistaken, starting in, I would guess, in the late 70s. They were, as I remember, about 3 to 6 months apart, and they were not correlated. That is, the LA Times, for whatever reasons, did not sort of catch that they had had a story about this before. They were all very small, and essentially they would go like, some young man, usually of Southeast Asian origin, had been reported to have died in the middle of a nightmare. And the first two I clipped and kept without thinking too much about it, and then the third one had really the nub of a story in it. And basically this kid, and he had been he and his family had come out of the relocation camps in Southeast Asia, I think Cambodia, something like that. They were now in the United States, living someplace in California. And he had been troubled by severe nightmares. And they had they had increased in intensity to the point where he had told his family, they don't feel ordinary. And his family had tried to console him and tell him, we've come out of this terrible background. Nightmares are a normal part of your psyche, try to deal with that. But he increased in the sense of trying to say, this doesn't feel normal, it feels too real. And at a certain point, they had a doctor prescribe sleeping medicine for him, and his father insisted he take it. And it turned out later that he had taken the pills in under their supervision, and then as soon as they were away, he had spit them out. And they also discovered later that he had a coffee pot in his closet that he had kept with black coffee to stay awake at night. So this had gone on. He had decided at a certain point to stay awake and not sleep. And obviously the family thought he was having something like a nervous breakdown. And after about 3 days, he would be downstairs watching television all through the night. They went down and found him asleep on the couch, and the father brought him back to his bed. And the family, sort of felt like, thank God, he seems to be sleeping peacefully. And they all went to bed. And later in the night, they heard screaming and thrashing about. They ran into his room. And before they could get to him, he fell dead, stone dead. And the family had to have an autopsy done. And there was no heart failure. There was no sign of why he had died. That was a story. It was about a 10-inch story instead of the others were 3 or 4-inch stories. And I just read that. I said, this is like, it just evoked something very deep in me. So I started thinking, what an incredible story if there were some being, something that was trying to kill you from within your dreams. How would you battle it, And I kind of wrestled with that and talked about it with my girlfriend at the time. And also I talked about it with Steve Miner, who was somebody who I had known from the time of Last House. He was my assistant editor on Last House on the Left, and we had stayed in touch, and he was living out in California at the same time too. And finally, and he thought it was a good idea too. And finally, I hit upon the idea that the only way to deal with it was to somehow bring that being out into your world. So I struck upon the conceit that whatever you were holding in the dream at the moment that you woke up would be brought back with you. And that kind of completed the metaphor, that if you can bring this thing that is threatening you out into the light of day, you will have a way of coping with it. And in that sense, that's how humans deal with their nightmares. Nightmare on Elm Street was written after I did Swamp Thing. I'd done 2 pictures back to back, and everybody was saying, you've made it, man. And you got to write your own script. Fantastic. Went off and wrote it, and absolutely nobody thought it was scary. Nobody thought it was good, except for Bob Shea. Bob Shea, who I had met through, I forget, a mutual friend in New York. We had shaken hands, and he had said, I like your films. At that time, it was, I think, Last House and The Hills of Eyes that he had seen. I'd like to do something with you sometime. Do you have any ideas? And I described this idea. He said, I really like that. And when I finished the script, I ran it by Bob, and he said, I like this a lot. I'm going to try to raise money. And he went off on something that took him 3 years to raise money for that. Meanwhile, I impatiently sent it to everybody in Hollywood, and everybody rejected it for various reasons. Either it wasn't scary. Sean Cunningham, who should know horror, said, I don't think people will be afraid of it because it happens in dreams, and they'll know it's a dream, so they won't be afraid. A lot of studios rejected it because horror was going through a period where it was considered politically non-correct, and it was considered dead, which is, I've observed this, having done this going on 25 years or more, that horror goes through these cycles where everybody says it's improper and it's dead and we'll never have it again, and then suddenly it comes back like gangbusters. So this was one of those periods where it was considered dead and sort of passé. And I collected a huge stack of rejection letters saying thank you very much, but we don't think it's for us, or we don't think it's scary. And then finally, Bob Shea was able to put together about half of the budget that I thought I needed. And I decided, well, it's either now or never, so we went ahead and did it.